Roman cooking is remembered for olive oil, for wine, for black pepper, carried halfway across the world at ruinous cost. Then you walk through Pompeii. The most common labeled food container in the city is not an oil jar, but it is a small, one-handled jug with a brand name painted on the shoulder, a quality grade beside it, and the species of fish it was made from. Fish. Salted fish, packed into stone vats and left in the sun until it turned to liquid, then poured over almost everything on a Roman table. The sauce had several names, and the argument about those names has not finished. Garum, liquamen, Maria, alec. For most of the last century, scholars treated the first two as one product under two fashions of speech. Sally Granger has made the case that they were genuinely different things. Garum drawn from the blood and viscera of larger fish, liquamen made from whole small ones, and that the recipes in the surviving Roman cookbook call for the second rather than the first. Robert Curtis, who spent a career on the archaeology of Roman fish processing, read liquamen instead as a thinner second product, drawn off after the first pressing had been taken. The honest position is that the Romans were not consistent either, and a word that travels across 4 centuries and 2 languages does not resolve into one clean definition just because we would like it to. I find Granger's reading the more convincing of the two, mostly because it matches what the excavated vats actually contain. The Romans did not invent any of it. Greek communities were making a salted fish preparation called gyros centuries earlier, along the Black Sea coast especially, where the fisheries were rich enough to be a reason for settling in the first place. Rome took a Greek habit, industrialized it, and put it in branded jars. That is roughly what Rome did to a lot of things. Then there is the reputation problem. Seneca, in one of his letters, calls the finest grade an expensive mass of decayed fish that burns the stomach with its salted rot. Pliny the Elder, who was not a squeamish man, describes the stuff in the Natural History as a liquor of putrefaction. Modern writers have taken those lines at face value and built a joke out of them. The Romans, with their aqueducts and their bathhouses and their obsession with clean water, sitting down to eat rotten fish on purpose. It was not rotten. The difference is chemistry, not manners, and it is worth being exact about. Small oily fish went into the vat in layers with salt, roughly 1 part salt to 3 or 4 parts fish by weight, sometimes heavier. Salt does 2 jobs at once here. It pulls water out of the flesh by osmosis, and the brine that forms is far too concentrated for the bacteria that cause spoilage to live in. What keeps working is the fish itself. The enzymes an anchovy uses to digest its own food, sitting in the gut, do not switch off when the anchovy dies. They go on breaking down protein, and the protein they are surrounded by is the anchovy. Long chains come apart into shorter ones, and then into single amino acids, and the one that matters at the table is glutamate, the molecule behind the savory depth, now called umami. A vat of fish and salt standing in the sun is a machine for turning protein into free glutamate. Nobody who built one needed to know that in order to know that it worked. Salt-tolerant bacteria move in later and do most of the work on aroma. The mash was turned from time to time and left for 2 or 3 months in the heat. Then a long woven basket was pushed down into it. The clear amber liquid seeped through the sides, and that liquid was ladled off into jars. The paste left behind was called alec and sold cheap. A Byzantine farming manual compiled around the 10th century AD, the Diocletian, preserves the method almost as a set of workshop notes, which is how a recipe for something industrial survives when nobody thought it worth writing down at the time. The vats are the part that changes the picture. This was not only a kitchen craft. Along the coasts of the Roman world sit the remains of purpose-built factories, rows of stone tanks waterproofed and cut in near the shore, sited downwind of the towns they fed, for reasons anybody who has stood beside a fermenting one can explain. At Troia, on the Portuguese coast, archaeologists working the site have counted roughly 200 tanks across 29 separate salting plants. with an estimated capacity running past 1 million liters. That is not a village supplying itself. That is an export industry with a supply chain, a workforce, and a shipping schedule. In Pompeii, the trail gets personal. A man named Aulus Umbricius Scaurus dominated the local trade in the decades before the eruption of AD 79, and the floor mosaic in his house shows 4 jugs of his own product with the labels written out on them, quality grade included, the ancient equivalent of hanging your packaging on the wall. Jugs carrying his mark have turned up at sites well beyond Campania. Somebody in Pompeii was branding fish sauce, grading it, and shipping it under his own name. The labels themselves are worth reading. They name the grade, they name the fish, and they name the workshop in that order. The top grade was written as the flour of the sauce, meaning the first clear liquid off an unbroken batch. The pressing before anyone added brine and started again on the leftovers. Below that came the second washing, and below that the paste. 3 grades from one vat, priced separately, out of a raw material that had cost almost nothing on the quayside. Prices ran the full length of the market. Pliny records that the most prized version came from mackerel, processed near Cartagena in Spain, that it was called the sauce of the Allies, and that 2 congi of it, about 6.5 liters, cost close to 1,000 sesterces. That is in the region of a legionary's annual pay. He adds that scarcely any liquid apart from perfume was valued more highly. The first time I read that figure, I assumed it had been garbled somewhere in transmission because it reads like a misprint. Quoting only that number gives a false impression, though, and the correction matters. Diocletian's price edict of AD 301 sets separate ceilings for first quality and second quality liquamen, which is what a government does to an ordinary commodity that ordinary households buy, not to a luxury. Cheap grades were made in back rooms, behind fish stalls, out of the parts nobody would buy whole. Fermentation vats have been found in market stalls and in private houses. So the picture is a pyramid, a famous premium brand at the top that costs like perfume, and beneath it, a very large volume of everyday sauce that costs like vinegar. The claim that Roman cooking ran on it needs the same care. In the recipe collection that has come down to us under the name Apicius, fish sauce appears in most of the dishes, including sweet ones, and that book records the cooking of rich households rather than the diet of a farmhand in Gaul. What carries the wider claim is not the cookbook. It is the amphora fragments, which turn up from Britain to the Black Sea, in forts, in rubbish tips, in shipwrecks. The bones at the bottom of one Spanish vat have just been read. Picture the Galician coast of northwest Spain in late summer, around 1800 years ago, at a salting plant now called Adro Velo. The sardine shoals arrive in a pulse. Boats come in heavy and keep coming, and the whole catch has to be dealt with before the next day's heat gets to it, because a sardine in August is worthless by evening. So the work is fast and it does not stop. Fish are gutted with 2 or 3 cuts and thrown into the tanks. Salt goes down in layers between them. Baskets are hauled, brine slops over the stone lips and dries white in the sun, and the smell sits over the whole shoreline for months. The tanks are filled, weighted, and left. Nobody involved is doing anything clever. They are doing something that works on a scale that keeps a town employed. In 2025, a team of researchers published a study in the journal Antiquity on the residue at the bottom of one of those tanks. Tiny fragmented bones had survived in the dregs, mostly vertebrae, and Gonzalo Temudo and colleagues managed to extract and sequence DNA from them, which was not obvious in advance. Crushing, salt, acid, and 18 centuries are exactly the conditions that shred genetic material past reading. The bones came back as European sardine. Their genetics also sat close to the sardines swimming off that same coast today, which makes a Roman fish vat, of all things, a baseline for what a fish population looked like before industrial fleets. Here's what the whole business actually was, underneath the jokes about rotten fish. Small, oily fish arrive in huge pulses and then vanish for the season. They spoil within a day in Mediterranean heat, and they are too fatty to dry well, which is what you would otherwise do with a glut. Salt and time turned that problem inside out. A catch that was worthless by nightfall became a product that kept for years without a seller, traveled sealed in a jar to the far end of the empire, and delivered salt and savor and a load of amino acids in the same pour. That is the reason it is everywhere in the archaeology. Not because Romans had strange taste, because it was the best storage technology available for the most perishable food they had, and the flavor was what the storage technology happened to produce. Why it faded out of the West is genuinely unsettled. One reading, argued by the archaeologist Claudio Giardino, is economic. Salt was cheap under Roman administration and got taxed hard afterwards. Coastal factories sat exposed once the fleets that policed the sea were gone, and the long-distance trade that made industrial production worth doing thinned away. Another reading is duller and may be closer to the truth, that demand simply went local and small, and the big plants stopped making sense before anyone stopped wanting the sauce. I could not find a study that settles it, and the sources on either side are thin enough that anyone claiming certainty is guessing. The East kept it longer, and there is a bad-tempered witness to that. Liutprand of Cremona, a bishop sent to Constantinople as an envoy in the 10th century AD, complained about the food he was given there, and among his complaints he notes the fish sauce, still in ordinary daily use, in a tone that says his readers back home would find this exotic. Two halves of the same former empire, 400 years apart in their eating over a condiment. Two teams have gone back and made the stuff to find out what it was like. At Troia, the same Portuguese site with the 200 tanks, a group of archaeologists, biologists, and one chef loaded an ancient stone vat with 400 kilos of sardines, 150 kilos of sea salt, and 350 liters of seawater, and then waited. Researchers at the University of Cadiz worked from residues and old recipes instead, and now sell the result in amphora-shaped bottles. The reports on flavor are consistent and slightly disappointing for anyone hoping for horror. Salty, deep, closer to aged parmesan than to fish. That last point is the one modern cooks already know without thinking about it. The fishy smell sits in volatile compounds that cook off in seconds. What stays behind is the glutamate, and glutamate does not taste of fish at all. It tastes of savory. What is not in doubt is that the thing itself never died. Fish sauce is the backbone of cooking across Southeast Asia now, and the method has barely moved. Anchovies layered with salt at roughly 3 parts, fish to 1 part salt, pressed under weights, left in the sun for 9 to 12 months, then drawn off clear and amber. Same fish family, same salt ratio, same gut enzymes doing the same work. Whether there is any historical connection between the Roman industry and the Asian one is not established, and the ordinary reading is that both are independent answers to the same situation, which turns up wherever small oily fish, sea salt, and strong sun occur in the same place. In Europe, a thread survived too. On the Amalfi coast, the village of Setara still makes colatura di alici anchovy drippings, which got protected status in 2020 and which food historians treat as the nearest living relative of the Roman product. And if there is a bottle of Worcestershire sauce in the cupboard, turn it round and read the label. Anchovies are in there, doing the same job they did for scoris. In Setara, in August, barrels are packed with salted anchovies and weighted with a stone. A small opening at the base is left open. Amber liquid comes through it 1 drop at a time into a jar that takes months to fill. 800 miles west, on a beach in Galicia, sardine bones lie in the bottom of a stone tank where somebody tipped them 1,800 years ago.